Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Allah is a mystery to man. Yet, Allah is all important to man. Without Allah, there is no man. And without understanding Allah, we can't understand ourselves. So we have to do what it is that we can do in order to understand God. And God is explained to us in two ways. It's explained to us as to what he is and what he isn't. Of course, none of these descriptions begin to describe the immensity of his existence, the immensity of his power, the overwhelming grace and effulgence of who he is, but they are attempts to describe them for man so that man can have some inkling of what God is like. God has no place of his own. He has no illusion. He has no desire. His beauty consists of love and compassion, and that is his form. Now, when we talk about beauty in the world, we talk about physical form. God's beauty is not in form, but in action. His beauty is in his love and his compassion. So we have to reconceptualize what beauty is. Beauty is not necessarily form. Beauty is actions that are beautiful in their essence. And Allah's essence is beautiful. Allah's essence is love, compassion, and that is his beauty. Now, within each of us, there's been placed a soul, and that a soul also has beauty to it. Its beauty is in its affection, in its tolerance, in its peacefulness, in its ability to love all others as it loves itself. But this soul has been hidden to us through the birth that was contained within elemental form. So here we have a soul within elemental form, and because of that elemental form, it has lost touch. We have lost touch with it, and we've lost touch with its connection to our Lord. Now, God resides within us. In his power, he has created a dwelling for himself inside of man's heart. A church, a mosque, a synagogue, call it what you want, but there's a dwelling that God has within every man. And for man to come to know God, he must come to understand the essence of God in his own being. So when man can get to the point that he dwells within God, then God dwells within man. And this concept is why we have to begin to understand the attributes of God and the non-attributes of God. God doesn't have desire. God doesn't have illusion. God doesn't have sin. God doesn't have Satan. God doesn't have anger. God doesn't have arrogance. But God does have mercy. God does have compassion. God does have love. God has divine qualities and he lives within an effulgence. He is an effulgence. He is an effulgence beyond our understanding. And this enormously powerful, majestic being becomes one who does duty to man. If we become his slave, if we become small and become the ones who worship him and surrender to him, he then surrenders to us and supports us and brings us into reality, brings us into the light. But that place where light exists, that place that is his kingdom, is separate from this world. There's a word called barzakh, and it has many different definitions. But one of the ways it's defined is the separation between this world and the next world. And if we are to enter into the next world, we have to take on the qualities of God, and we have to leave the qualities of this world. Now, man who is arrogant, man who has ego, man who believes in his own powers, tries to decipher the world. In truth, we cannot decipher it. What happens is we can be given the answers, and the answers are already embedded within us. But if we try to find the answers through logic and through our mind, then we are subject to the corruption that the mind has. And why is the mind corrupt? Because the mind is elemental. The mind is made up of the same elements that we are. The mind is not divine. So we're trying to decipher what is divine through the elemental. And deciphering divinity through the elemental will not bring us to divinity. The only way to get to divinity is through divinity. And the only way to touch divinity and come close to divinity is to become small, which means to give up that which has arrogance, to give up that which has the qualities of hell, to give up that which is of the world, to give up illusion, to give up what the eyes see. It's said that what the eyes see and what the mind thinks is the portion of hell. We need to be able to go beyond that portion. Yet, to make that break, to break with that, is a very, very difficult thing to do, because we've been born into the world and we've used our senses our entire life to give us position in the world and to act within the world. And now we're told that if you want to make the break with the world, you can't use the tools of the world. You have to use the tools of divinity. And what are the tools of divinity? The tools of divinity are wisdom. And what is wisdom? Wisdom is a point of view that isn't based in what we know as a worldly way. Wisdom is based in light without self-motive, without ego, without arrogance, without anger. It's what comes to us from divinity. It's a divine understanding. Wisdom is a gift from the divine to know the divine. So, how is wisdom differentiated from mental imaging? Wisdom comes from light and comes from a space that is from the light. And the light is the kingdom of God. So wisdom is divine understanding and doesn't come from our internal machinations. It's a gift that is given to us if we become small enough to allow that gift to happen. And what does it mean to become small enough? It means to give up our attachments to this world. It means to give up our arrogance. It means to give up our anger. It means to give up all of the qualities that make us large within the world, all of the qualities that steer us through this world and give us power within the world. So if we can voluntarily give up our worldly power and allow Allah's power to be what guides us, then we're no longer dealing with the mind. We're no longer dealing with desire. We're no longer dealing with the elemental arrogance that we are consumed by, but we have surrendered. And upon our surrender, Allah begins to carry us. Allah takes us to truth, because in truth, Allah is all that exists. And when we give up our existence, then we become part of all that exists. So we have within us an inclination to resist surrender. The mind and all of the things that we've accumulated over the years as our self-identification don't want to be done with. They don't want to leave. They don't want to be disowned. They don't want to be put away. So they fight to stay in control. They fight to be at the forefront of our consciousness. They fight to continuously tell us that they are capable of taking care of us. And we need to figure out that the only one who is capable of taking care of us is Allah. And we have to ask for his protection. And we have to ask for his guidance. And we have to ask for his intervention in our being so that we can become real. This path is a very, very narrow way. And it's only available to those who have become small. Our Sheikh called himself the Ant-Man, the smallest of creatures, the most discarded of creatures. And when we can get to that place, where we become small, where we become insignificant, when we no longer have that egocentric self, that egocentric idea of our prominence, that egocentric idea of our importance, that egocentric idea of our capabilities, when we give these up, then Allah takes control. And when Allah takes control, then we are being steered in the right direction. Then all of a sudden, instead of messages from the mind, we get messages from Allah. There's a resonance. There's a resolve that comes from him. There's an understanding that comes from him. It doesn't come from us internally. It comes as a direct stream from him. And when that enters us, then we begin to know truth. So that which we call science, which tries to put things in place, it does all of that not by divine intervention, not by divine understanding, but through an elemental understanding. And man tries to define God through elemental resources. Since what we know is earth, air, fire, water, and ether, since what we interact with all the time are the elements, we try to use the elements to define God. And it can't be done. So what happens is the mind, because it keeps trying to find God, loses itself in that search and concludes that, or comes to the, or sees that it can't find anything. So what does it do? It makes things up, and it begins to call power God. It begins to call wealth God. It begins to call gold God. It begins to call fame God, and begins to worship these things because it can't understand the concept. It understands sex, and it understands that sex creates, and it understands that through sex there is creation. So it begins to worship sex. And if you know anything about certain religions, you know that certain religions actually worship the sexual act, and they worship it as the core of creation, when in fact it isn't the core of creation. The core of creation is God's power. The core of creation is God's intervention to man. There are many doors that we need to open. There are many paths that we need to cross. But the mind is constantly in our way, trying to stop us at each one of these paths and telling us we don't need to go any further. And in truth, as a pilgrim, there is never an end to the doors that we have to go through. And what's the key to each one of these doors? It's wisdom. And wisdom is divine knowledge. Wisdom is divine understanding. And divine understanding is available to each and every one of us. But to get divine understanding, we have to give up our attachment to illusion. We have to give up our attachment to elemental understandings. We have to give up attachment to sexual understanding. We have to give up our attachment to all of the joys that we find through our eyes and through our senses. These things are not divine. These things are temporal. These things are of the world. And if we are to go further, we have to lose our attachment to them. It is said that what the eyes see take us to hell. What the senses find joy in take us to hell. So we need to find something beyond that. We need to find what it is to find the joy of compassion, to find the joy of mercy, to find the joy of unconditional love, to find the inherent effulgence that exists within us that is attached to the great effulgence that is our Lord. And if we continue to move on this path, then we'll find that Allah is within us and we are within him. And then if we can cross over into that realm of light, which is his kingdom, we can see more and more and more. And eventually there will be a crystal. And if we look into the crystal, we'll see ourselves as a divine 16-year-old. And since God has no form, this form shows you that you've reached the God within yourself. You've touched the God within yourself, and then you disappear into that godliness. This is the work that's been given to us, to go from an elemental being, or at least a being that we believe is elemental, to a being of light, to a being that is of the soul and then of God. This is the path that we have been given. This is the true path of man. But man gets distracted, and he gets distracted in so many different ways. And then he takes on ideas that are cultural phenomenon that have happened for years and years, and he holds them out as reality. He begins to believe that the length of his beard determines whether or not he's holy, or the length of his hair determines whether or not he is holy, or the clothes that he wears determines whether or not he is holy, or the day that he prays determines whether or not that he's holy, or the language that he prays in determines whether or not he is holy. But in truth, what determines whether or not man is holy is the state of his purity. And the state of his purity is the state of his detachment from the world and the worldly ways. So we live in this dichotomy where we live within the world, but we're not of the world. Where we work within the world, but we're not of the world. We're dependent on the world for our sustenance, but that sustenance comes from God. And we need to understand that everything that we see and everything that we touch is an example of the truth. So we eat food, but it's an example of God's mercy. We drink water, but it's an example of God's mercy. And when we begin to understand things in that way, and we see these examples of truth come into our being, and we see them for what they are, as opposed to the examples that they exemplify, then we begin to see truth. Now, what happens to man is he loses touch with the fact that they're examples. And the elements have a natural arrogance within them, and they drive us towards gold, women, and earth. And we no longer see gold, women, and earth as examples. We no longer see power as an example. We no longer see food as an example. We see it as a reality. And we see it as something that we have to strive for in order to get, that it's something that we need, and that without it, we are somehow lacking. This is why there's fasting, to make you understand that food is not what sustains you. This is why there's charity, to make you understand that wealth is not what sustains you. What sustains you is God. So God says, give away some wealth as an example for yourself that the wealth is not necessary. Give away some food so that you understand that food is not what's necessary. What's necessary is God's qualities. What's necessary is understanding wisdom. And you're not going to find wisdom in books. You're not going to be able to read about wisdom and be able to understand it. The only way to obtain wisdom is through contact with wisdom. In that contact, there is a transference of the resonance. In that contact, there is a taking on of the truth. One of Allah's miracles in this world is that he has given the ones who he's given wisdom to the ability to transfer that wisdom to the ones who come in contact with them. So when people have wisdom, they give wisdom. If they can't give wisdom, they're not going to have wisdom. So one of the things that you will find among people to whom you can rely on is they have a generosity of spirit. Whatever they have, they give. They don't hold on because they do what God does. And what is it that God does? He constantly gives. He's constantly generous. He understands that there is no diminishing his wealth. And man, on the other hand, sees wealth as finite, sees having things as finite. And when man can cross over from that finite way of seeing things into the abundant way of seeing things, then abundance will come his way. But we need to cross through being able to see things as not being enough to understanding that there's more than we can possibly need. And we're always in a state where there is more than we can possibly need, because Allah's wealth is undiminishable and there is enough for everybody. But in the world, we all act as if there's not. So religions fight religions, claiming they have some kind of control over the truth. And only if you come to their little well can you get reality. Allah's effulgence is so great that it can't be contained. It can't be contained by religion. It can't be contained by philosophy. It can't be contained by race. It can't be contained in any way by man. And when man understands that, then man becomes abundant in his being. He becomes generous in his being. He becomes giving in his being. And you will also notice that all of these qualities are divine qualities. Generosity is a name of God. Abundance is a name of God. Mercy, compassion are all names of God. And as we understand this, then we understand the qualities that we have to incorporate into our being. And as we incorporate those qualities are without form. They are formless. They are of the light. And as we take on the light qualities, we become closer and closer to the truth, because we become more and more that which is the soul that is within us, which is the light from Allah. And as that happens to us, then we become real. And then we begin to understand the true way. And when that happens, things open up in a way that is beyond our imagination. All of a sudden, we are in contact with 124,000 prophets. we are in contact with the Ketubs. And in reality, we were in contact with the Ketub in manifest form. This great blessing is given to man out of God's generosity. And if man truly understands the nature of the blessing, then he takes on what he can from that blessing and incorporates it into himself. We are meant to become that which shows us the way. We are meant to become that which tells us the truth. We are meant to become that which is real that enters into our life. And to do that, we have to be wise enough to recognize the truth when it comes near us. And then we have to meld into that truth. We have to become that truth. And we have to give up everything that isn't part of that truth. And this is dependent on our faith, on our certitude, and our determination. We have to believe that it can be done. We have to establish a belief system that Allah wants us to understand this and wants us to do this. And it is his intention for us. And it was the intention of the prophets who came to teach us this way. It was the intention of the Jnanis, the wise men, who came to teach us this way. It was the intention of the Ketubs to teach us this way. And it was their intention that we become like them. There is but one, and we are part of that one. And everything that holds us back from becoming part of that one is what we have to give up. So we have to filter and filter and filter and make everything smaller and smaller and smaller until this world fades away from us. And as the Nur came out from Allah, the Nur will come out from us, and it will tell us the truth, and we will recognize the truth, and we will become the truth. And may it be so for each and every one of us, that the truth is what we become. The truth is what we know. The truth is our way. The truth takes us to that kingdom of light that is God's kingdom. May it be so for each of us. Ameen, ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.